Alright everybody, here's a video with Mr. Longo on solving absolute value equations. So to start out, let's talk about what an absolute value is. So first of all, we know the difference between positive and negative. So let's talk about a number line, and we'll use 0 and say that we take 3 positive steps. That would be 1, 2, 3. And then let's say we're going to take 3 negative steps. We are 1, 2, 3. But let's talk about how many steps you took. How many steps did you take to get from 0 to 3? You took 3 steps. How many steps did you take to get from 0 to negative 3? So you only took 3 steps. Basically, absolute value just tells you how far you are away from 0 on the number line without stating a direction. So you take 3 steps forward, 3 steps backwards, it doesn't matter. You took 3 steps. So how far is 3 away from 0? The absolute value of 3 is 3 units away. What is the absolute value of a negative 3? Well, it is still 3 units away. So now let's talk about what happens when you throw a negative sign out front. So this is just like distributing a negative with parentheses, but you don't distribute a negative to absolute value. So it just looks very similar, but you don't distribute the negative inside of here. You have to leave it outside. Here's why. What is the opposite of the absolute value of 4? Well, the absolute value of 4 is 4, but the negative stays out front. So the opposite of the absolute value of 4 is a negative 4. What is the opposite of the absolute value of a negative 4? Well, again, you do not distribute a negative to absolute value. It just looks the same, but it's not. So the opposite, the absolute value of a negative 4 is 4, so it's still a negative 4. So basically, we can sum it up like this. The absolute value of a positive or a negative is always going to be positive. But if you put a negative sign in front of the absolute value, it's always going to be negative. Okay? So, let's talk about that some more now with solving. The absolute value of x is equal to 3. So let's go back and talk about what we just did above. What was the absolute value of 3? It was 3. What was the absolute value of a negative 3? It was still 3. So when you are solving absolute value equations, what you need to do is remember that both positive and negatives will give you a positive when you take the absolute value. So what you do is you take what's inside your absolute value and you set it equal to what's on the right side of the equal sign. But you also do it again, but you change this to the opposite. So what you do is you take the inside, set it equal to 3. Then you take the inside and set it equal to a negative 3. And then you solve both. Well, this one was designed to be easy so you can see the difference. So this one is already done. So let's talk about the next one. The absolute value of x plus 2 gives us 3. So remember, still, the absolute value of 3 is 3, and the absolute value of a negative 3 is still 3. So let's see if we can think about this in our head. What does x need to be to give us a positive 3? It's going to be 1, because 1 plus 2 is 3, and the absolute value of 3 is 3. Let's think about what would give it a negative 3. That would be a negative 5 plus 2 would be a negative 3, and the absolute value of that is 3. Now here's why I wanted you to think about it, because sometimes people will just subtract this first and then say x plus 2 is equal to 3, so x is equal to 1, so x is equal to a positive 1 or a negative 1. And that's not the case. So what you do again is you take your inside and you set it equal to 3. You take your inside again and you set it equal to the opposite of 3. So now you subtract 2 from both sides and you get x is equal to 1. And then you subtract 2 from both sides and you get x is equal to a negative 5. Okay? So that is solving. Now what you could do to write your final answer, if you have plus or minus, you can just say x is equal to positive or negative 3. And for this, if you have two of them, you can say x is equal to 1 or a negative 5. Okay? Now before you split and you set something equal to 8 or a negative 8, your absolute value needs to be all by itself. Just like when you're solving for x, you have to get x by itself. The first thing you do before you get x by itself is get the absolute value by itself. So you need to first divide both sides by 2 here. And that's going to give you the absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to 4. And now you're going to split it. X minus 5 is equal to 4, and x minus 5 is equal to a negative 4. Add 5 to both sides and you get x is equal to 9. Add 5 to both sides and you get x is also equal to 1. Okay? So that's solving absolute value equations. So why don't you pause the video and try these last 3 on your own and see how you do. Click play when you're ready to see how you did. So for this one, you should have subtracted 4 from both sides first. That would give you the absolute value of x minus 2 is equal to 4. And now you split. X minus 2 is equal to 4, and x minus 2 is equal to a negative 4. Add 2 to both sides, and you get x is equal to 6. Add 2 to both sides, and you get x is equal to a negative 2 as well. So you should have had 6 and negative 2 for this first one. And remember, you can always plug these back in to see if you're correct. So you could go all the way back here and substitute in a 6. So 6 minus 2 plus 4 equals 8. The absolute value of 6 minus 2 is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. And if you were to check with the negative 2, that would give you a negative 2 minus 2 is a negative 4. The absolute value of a negative 4 is still 4, and 4 plus 4 is still 8. Okay? For the second one, the first thing you needed to do was add 4 to both sides. So that gives you 3 times the absolute value of 2x plus 3, and that's equal to 15. You still need to get the absolute value by itself, so you need to divide both sides by 3. And that's going to give you the absolute value of 2x plus 3 is equal to 5. But now that you have the absolute value by itself, you can split. 2x plus 3 is equal to a positive 5, and 2x plus 3 is equal to a negative 5. And for this, you just continue solving. Subtract 3 from both sides, so 2x is equal to 2, so x is equal to 1. Subtract 3 from both sides here. 2x is equal to a negative 8. Divide both sides by 2, and you get x is also equal to a negative 4. And the last one, let's see if you were tricked. The answer to the last one is no solution. And the reason why is absolute value is never going to equal a negative number. Absolute value is always positive or 0. So since negative 4 is 0, the absolute value of whatever we put inside here is never going to give us a negative 0. Okay? Not to be confused with this guy. The absolute value brackets are gone. Okay? So absolute value will never equal a negative, so that one's done. This is Longo and I'm out. See you, bye.